need to bring down and again normalize.
Traumatized, here's a gun.
Oh no, is this gonna be some Rube Goldberg shit? Okay. Yeah.
Against two guys who have AR-15s. Tell me how. And you said yourself that the police may not make it there in time. Tell me how.
You know what? The best chance you got in a situation like that is to get out the house.
She just stated that
So
they reach
30
far.
rounds a piece? That's 90 rounds of bullets firing through the home. You need to get out of the house.
Oh, sorry.
What are we talking about? This person sounds fucking delusional.
I stand my ground. Sorry.
We are at 1.25 speed, by the way.
Thank you all for coming today. My name is Deacon Hamilton. I'm a correspondent with Vice News. Obviously, we couldn't get somebody to represent every single perspective on this, but we've tried to get across the range here. We're here today to talk about guns. It's a polarizing topic.
What are we missing? Are we okay? So the real question: are we going to be missing like a gun abolitionist, or are we going to be missing like the hardest 2A supporter?
Controversial topic, and I think in some ways arguing about what to do about guns and gun policy is about as American as apple pie. Raise your hand if you've ever shot a gun. Now, keep your hand up if you currently own a gun. All right?
Wow.
Keep your hand up if you own more than one gun. Keep your hand up if you own more than 10 guns.
God damn,
Keep your hand up if you own any AR-15s. How does
not what I would have guessed.
I feel
good for her.
Powerful. I feel confident.
Fun
Florida.
Is pretty much what I'm thinking about and what I'm feeling when I'm shooting a gun. It's a good time.
Like
Colorado.
Great power comes great responsibility.
Facts.
Determined, I guess, when I pick up a gun. Loaded, not loaded. Am I shooting? Am I shooting responsibly?
It's always been a very neutral experience for me because of things like that, where it's just about doing everything correctly.
Yeah.
I usually feel tired after shooting a lot. A lot of the training is extensive, and as an instructor, I'm usually also teaching while I'm
this person's an instructor. That's cool. That's super cool.
firearms.
If shooting a gun is exhausting, like teaching people to shoot guns is even more exhausting.
But it's exciting because you can empower somebody else. Like after it, you may feel tired and exhausted, but these people might be that much safer because of what you.
You know what I thought about? You know what I might do? Okay, so I have like okay. So I don't know if you guys have been here before. I have like whenever I do Brett Cooper videos, I have this hanging out right above me. What if during Matt Walsh we put fucking the peanut guy, the fucking Planters peanut guy in this spot? I'll just have a rotating cast of like little add-on people above me.
You taught them.
How many of y'all are longtime gun owners? Raise your hands. And how many are new gun owners who've just got into gun ownership and shooting? Okay.
I grew up around them, but I recently moved somewhere where I could personally own them.
I started, closer to 2018, 2019, when I just turned 18 years old and was legally allowed to buy guns. I did not grow up around guns. I started owning them because of different political conditions that we were under.
I think the reason why I don't own a gun, even though it always felt like a given,
Texas,
I grew up in San Antonio, and as a first-generation American growing up, I wanted to be a good American. I wanted to observe what everyone else is doing and be like, okay, that's how you be an American. That's how you do it. But then I went out to a really big defensive shooting training. It's like 1,000 rounds over a weekend. Lots of like pressure exercises.
I'll Photoshop him. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna fucking Photoshop him into the fucking Planters peanut. Okay, that's what I'm doing tonight after I edit. Yep, that's
lifestyle
that's
that I'm
happening.
not willing to take up.
Can we talk about why you guys chose to own guns?
Law enforcement.
And similar, I'm military or former military and carried a handgun concealed while I was deployed at 19.
That makes sense. In rural Virginia. And so for us, it was more of tradition. Boy. The first firearm I received or owned was the first firearm my father owned, which was a hunting rifle. And so for us, we were taught to take care of it, appreciate it, but know that it has a place.
My dad grew up in rural Pennsylvania, so I mean, he was shooting his whole life. He hunted, and so he thought it was important for us to learn pretty young
also my
about
boy.
Guns and how they
my
work.
family's from Pennsylvania.
I was
Man, I'm
up,
so fucking American.
That had guns,
people have nothing on me.
I didn't have the emotional maturity at that time to own guns. But as I got older, I started seeing it more as recreation. And then as the climate in the world changed and events happened in my life, I started to really be empowered by the security that they offered for me.
Well, I actually used to be a gun control activist.
I don't get the I guess I understand the empowerment thing, but I do think the impetus of owning a firearm to feel empowered is already, I think, a negative motivating factor to owning firearms. Like that in and of itself is like not the best way to initiate a firearm purchase. I think just from a mindset level, I'm concerned immediately about your not so much ability to like operate a firearm, but like to just kind of approach it with a positive mindset, I suppose.
And there were certain events that were happening where violence against trans women was, increasing across the country. And there was this one video that went viral where a trans woman was violently mobbed in a gas station one night. And that was a clicking moment for me. At that moment, I was like, you know what? The only thing that would have stopped her from this violent mob was, in fact, a gun.
How does the Second Amendment affect the way that you view gun ownership as a
debatable, but okay.
I think my right to defend myself how I see fit comes from my creator, not the Second Amendment. A lot of people hinge on the Second Amendment and the verbiage, and we dissect it and we try to interpret it. But ultimately, every person on this planet was born with the right to defend themselves.
I don't have any skin in the game. I don't own guns. So as far as 2A goes, I do not feel like that is a right that I personally want to protect or defend.
I feel very conflicted about the Second Amendment. At the end of the day, when we talk about the Constitution as like this sacred document, I mean, it was written by a bunch of rich white guys who owned slaves, didn't let women vote, and thought the Electoral College was a good idea. So maybe it's not a perfect document, and we should kind of update it as time progresses.
It's my right to defend myself. There is an ample amount of time between the time you call.
Okay, I don't know if you guys have ever seen this before. Like the thing, yeah, and hate me because I'm gonna be showing an Aaron Sorkin thing. The thing that I hear people say when they're like, "Oh, why I kind of went like this," for when they're like, "Oh, that you could have stopped yourself getting murdered if you had a gun." This is generally, statistically, what's gonna happen. Like, statistically speaking, a gun in any assault scenario increases the chance of harm, being done on the person who is generally already in the more, more vulnerable, state, basically. Meaning, yes, it can be an equalizing factor, but by no means does you owning a gun mean that, you're immediately safer. There is always, talk to anybody, go to any kind of gun training, and the first thing they're going to teach you is how to defend your weapon from being taken from you, because that's the first thing if somebody wants to assault you, you pull a gun on them. If they're able to get close enough, what they're going to do is wrestle your gun from you and then kill you. Yeah, it is. It's not the safety measure. I think people, I feel like people only think of it in a safety measure from the it can only be a positive factor in my safety, not a negative one, which is untrue.
All the police in the time that they arrived. It's my right to be able to protect myself in any way possible.
As a survivor of gun violence, I can't help but to think about how many people have been lost because of this perceived right or this outdated document. I feel like this debate around the Second Amendment is oversimplifying a really serious and complex issue. And unfortunately, there's too many privileged individuals having these debates, making these decisions, who aren't feeling the pain of what gun violence in our country has done to us.
In Connecticut, 2 officers were shot and killed. One guy is firing 80 rounds. One guy. I don't know if those 2 cops combined had 80 rounds. Now, I don't know how else they would have defended themselves other than a firearm. But it also comes out to who gets it out first. Personally, forget law enforcement, I have a 4.5-year-old son. I want to have a chance that, God forbid, I'm in a store and I see somebody down an aisle, or I hear a sound that sounds like a firearm, that there's a good chance that at least my son's going to survive.
We're in a world where we are literally out-arming who's supposed to be protecting us. And it's all coming from a place of fear. If we're thinking about how to protect our homes or to protect our families, there are better, lower-risk ways to do that. And as someone who's been shot, having a gun on me would have not saved my life. If anything, it would have cost me my life, because it gives you this false concept of confidence in a life or death situation.
I love this take.
Should be to flee or evade.
Yeah.
What are your ideas about other cost-effective ways to defend yourself?
Well, when we think about defending your
I remember I have a friend who literally tried to argue with me about gun laws, and they were trying to make the argument that if a shooter came into, because we live close to each other, they're like, well, if a shooter came into the grocery store, and we're in the grocery store and I'm armed and you're armed, don't you think that would be a better outcome? To which the most obvious response that he should have been able to think about, if he actually understood the relationship of firearm violence in mass shootings, is you have no idea where you're gonna be when that scenario pops off, right? Because it's wait. So you're telling me a guy just walks into our grocery store and opens fire? You're first of all baking into the scenario that we're not at the checkout lines, that we're not the first people struck. And now if we're both armed, that shooter now has 2 pistols on top of his fucking Matrix trench coat wearing ass gear. Now he's got 2 extra firearms to go on. And it's always baking in these hero scenarios. It's that's not how any of this shit works. Secondly, Like, if he had any goddamn sense, he would know that if you're anywhere if you're in a building, if you're in a grocery store and fucking like guns start going off, let alone an automatic, your fucking brain's gonna be scrambled from the sound, and then you're gonna get tunnel vision along with like, you're not gonna be able to function in this like this hardcore. You're not gonna go into fucking Call of Duty mode and start like, oh, here we go, let's fucking slide around the corner, hit him with the fucking, like, no, it's not gonna happen. And you're not gonna go into John Wick mode. Like, it, anyway, it's just like, sometimes people get this false sense that because like they understand or have some experience with firearms, that like a active shooter situation is like training. And I'm like, it is so far from training.
Or your body, or from harm or assault. The most impactful thing you can have is a known deterrent. A gun is not a known deterrent. And so when we think about keeping our home safe, specifically, simple things like having a dog, having the lights on, having a fence, having a security system, a security camera is more effective at protecting your homes.
What do you guys think are actual like good ideas in terms of gun regulation, if any?
The question I have is, are we going after the guns, or are we going after the people that are using them illegally? The second something happens, they don't talk about the person that committed the crime, but if someone's not on the opposite side of the gun, it will never go off unless the trigger is pulled. And I think there needs to be more accountability, whether legally or not legally used. There needs to be accountability for people to say, wait a minute, if I do something really dumb with this or hurt somebody, I might not see the light of day for a while.
We've created this image in America, and I partially blame.
I wish I could open that in a different window, but what is...
Customer who shot and killed an armed robber is coming forward today. The drama erupted at this restaurant in Houston. You can see the masked robber brandishing a pistol, ordering all the people inside to hand over their money. The guy in the gray t-shirt throws some bills on the floor. Two customers cower under a table as they give up their cash.
Taking cover,
But the t-shirt guy is about to act. As the gunman walks by, he leaps up and opens fire with his own gun. Then he tells the victims they can retrieve their cash.
Wait, where the fuck did the guy go? Where? Oh, is that him right there? Is that him in the blurred area? No, that can't be him in the blurred. Maybe it is. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, again, it's not impossible, but you're not this shit happens. But again, like, God forbid homeboy's safety's on, something goes wrong, and then he just gets clapped. Like, this is always, you'll always find like a few examples, and at the end of the day, there's always like that chance. But like by no way can we like use scenarios like this as a as a way to build policy, because it's just, they're not what's the word I'm looking for? They're not damn it, what's the word? Not it starts with an R-E. Fuck, I hate when my brain does this. I can never remember the words I'm looking for. Oh, whatever. But it's just not that likely that it's always going to happen like this all the time. It's just, we need a better system for this, which, but yeah, like, good for this guy. Fuck, dude. Thank God for these people. Fuck.
The media that violence in black communities is a result of criminal activity, when in reality, most situations are interpersonal conflicts that are not connected to another felony. And that false sense of having a firearm will make me safer turns what would have been a fist fight, an argument, into something that causes someone their life.
You move your finger and you end a human life. That's a responsibility that we should take a lot more seriously in this country. You get convicted of domestic violence. No guns for you. Universal background checks, I think, would be a great idea.
And
I think the idea that we don't treat something that was created for killing people,
most gun owners believe in this stuff. Most gun owners support
really weird
universal background checks.
I think a big problem with people have with like universal background checks,
they definitely did not. They definitely did not.
I teach and I give out certificates and all that. Hard states have been sued for the fact that they won't give it to BIPOC. They won't give it to poor people. They won't give these rights to trans people. You start denying these rights, and they're like, oh well, we regulate this, but we only give it to the rich, and we only give it to the well-connected, right? And then on the other side, we don't make education available to all these people that can't afford it. Like, why isn't it free? Why can't you go down to City Hall and take a class on how to teach your kids
also about... MurderCom, I just realized, I noticed how you put guy was just robbing the place, like he was just casually like, yeah, went down to the local 7-Eleven and go rob me some people. Like,
firearm safety.
I like how nonchalant you were about that.
We kind of moved to an abstinence-only education culture. If you have someone in your community who commits a crime, it's the community's fault. Like, how did that person get to that point?
A lot of folks here say that they own guns as a self-defense tool. How do we feel about that?
Shit is so bleak in America. Like, I don't blame people for feeling unsafe. Everyone here is concerned with survival. Everyone who picks up a gun is concerned with survival. There is this sense of despair in America when it comes to resource scarcity, food scarcity, housing scarcity, scarcity of care. People do not resort to terrible things when they have support, when they have a community, when they feel like their survival is not at stake.
In America, the two solutions that are introduced are too heavily focused on the individual and the gun. But a solution we never introduce is regulating the gun industry and the profiteers of massive amount of.
Yeah, I've heard the Canadian like gun laws are like really like weird. I've heard that about the Canadian gun laws. I think that, like, to me, there's definitely like the U.S. has like some of the least strict gun laws. And like, for me, I just want some really basic like gun safety regulations and like sale situation, like sale regulations. The process right now and getting the PAL, is that like a license to arm, I'm assuming? Oh, that's good.
Weapons being introduced into America, and I think that's something that in America
I love how they call it a
PAL. We're not talking about how do we hold
got my PAL and my I got my PAL to have my gun
accountable in this conversation.
We forget to talk about white nationalism and the fact that this country was a settler colonial country based on taking land from indigenous people and suppressing enslaved people. Gun conversation, as soon as you wade into it, is so freaking racist. It's really misogynistic, and when we really start to zoom in on this stuff, we find levers. We can better identify where threats come from, what kinds of discourse really start to put us in danger. And actually, the gun industry lobbies a lot and pays for the campaigns of a lot of people
Republicans
who condone this kind of culture. And so that's one lever in which I think we need to be a lot.
Also, keep in mind, we didn't pass we didn't pass national gun reforms until the Black Panthers started carrying guns in California. Then when radical black activists carried guns, then we decided to. Then the NRA was all for gun regulations. She is right when it comes to the racism angle. The systems that we have built up have had a pretty strong interest in making sure that guns are kept out of the hands of black and non-white activists, especially in the 1970s and 80s, but somehow have been very silent when it comes to the proliferation of guns amongst militias in like fucking Michigan, for example.
Put a lot more scrutiny on.
I agree with a lot of things from what everybody else said, but I feel like a lot of the gun control issues drown out the actual issues. Like, let's take school shootings, for example. School shootings are awful, they're horrible, but here's my question. What has been done to make schools more secure? I do executive protection and armed security, and I've been offered countless times jobs at schools. They pay $12, $13, $14 an hour. A single mother
sounds
with
like a
kids,
capitalism issue.
An amount I can work for, nor does it reflect my value as a security officer. But
sounds like we should be fighting for a higher minimum wage.
What is being done for it? We're not paying security extra. We're not, doing single points of entry. We're not reinforcing the perimeters. We're not doing any of those things. We're focusing on gun control, and yet when this happens again, we're confused as to why it happened again, because nothing was done to stop the problem.
I don't think, turning schools into fortresses, having more armed security is the solution here. I'd rather have a part-time school counselor than a full-time, resource officer.
There are counselors, though.
But are they? Like, when you put a police officer
they're really
in school,
not.
You're creating an
they're really
environment where
not.
you're putting students in jail or in prison instead of going after the problems. Instead of
I've had
lockdown drills,
I had like 3 counselors throughout high school. I met with exactly one of them, and it was the one time I got in trouble. Like, the only people who actually see their counselors frequently are actually the kids who like get in a fuck ton of trouble all the time, and usually they get treated like pretty, at least in my school, they were treated rather well. And they kind of were buddy with like security and everybody else because they had interacted with them so much from getting in trouble all the fucking time. But like, yeah, like school counselors, most of the time, it's like one for every like, it's like maybe it really depends on your school. It might be like one for every 100 students. We had 4,000 kids in our school, but we only had maybe 8 school counselors. That's a lot. It's crazy. The ratio is like nuts. So obviously they don't meet with everybody, or they just meet with everybody in the beginning of the year, get a vibe check, and you never see them again.
We could give them more food security. Community garden is probably going to go way farther for their mental health than simulating gunfire in the hallways. If we do have school shooters, well, where are they coming from? They're coming from the school. We're letting these kids down. We're showing them the rehearsal. And then
they're also usually coming from parents who are irresponsible with their storage of firearms.
And that's law enforcement, who want more money and more weapons to make everyone safer. Inflated crime statistics, whatever it takes. Because sadly, this works in elections. It works on parents. It works on families who don't know what else to do. But there are so many places to put money in a community, and we are starving those places out of existence.
I want to ask Joey, as a police officer, when you hear this group talking about cops getting money that they might not put to good use, how does that sit with you?
You know, it's hard. No one sees what police officers are doing every single day. They hear a news clip, they get...
I do. I grew up with one. I get to see all of it. You can't say this to me. Police officers generally are doing a lot of paperwork.
10 seconds of what happened in a 5-minute situation right off the bat. Do I think we need to change and move ahead with the time?
RPAL and PAL-R allows you to have AR-15s and such, capped at 5 rounds. 5 round, there is a loophole, can use 50 Beowulf mags and load 14. It's legal as long as the magazine's saying it's a 50 cal. 50 Beowulf. Okay, so it's specific rounds. But restricted guns are lame. You can only take them to the range and back. Need permission to transport from RCMP, even to take it to the gunsmith. If you deviate from the range into home or forget a single piece of paper, and you could lose your license and go to jail. Yeah, okay. So I would definitely say there is a middle ground between this and the US. But yeah, that is very what's the word? That's rather strict. I feel like you shouldn't be going to jail if you're just transporting, but also there's an element where it's like you only need to take it off of that route once to harm people, so I can understand why that's there. But then again, if you were gonna do that, it doesn't matter. Like, jail time doesn't matter to you if you're gonna do that either way. So I guess technically that's really not a deterrent. Yeah, like gun stuff, the gun debate's like complicated. There's a lot of there's a balancing act between like giving people the freedom with their property and to, I mean, hold something that carry a tool that could save their life and also balance that with public safety. I think there's a what's it called? If I remember correctly, I believe it's Japan. Japan has really strict gun storage laws. I really like those. Pretty much the government, as you like, when you own a firearm, the government, I believe it's once a year, will come to your house and they will inspect how you're storing and where you're storing your firearms. And if it's all still above board and it passes regulations, you're allowed to keep your firearms. If not, then you have to keep them at a usually like a community armory or like a gun range. I think those laws are I think we can implement something similar without taking away people's rights to own, but you do have to store them in a proper way. One of the biggest causes of school shootings is irresponsible parents leaving their like fucking guns in unsafe storage and just leaving them around, and then kids get a hold of them, and if you have a kid who has mental health problems, if they're in that kind of mood, they just steal your gun, go in and murder their classmates. I own firearms, but like they're kept under locks with keys and combinations that I know and others don't. And that's how it always should be. I remember growing up, I knew where my dad's SIG was, but never did I know where like the key, because he had like he had one of those like trigger locks basically. So like you can't even put your hand in it. You can I don't even know if you could eject the magazine now that I think about it. But like I never knew where that key was, and he would never share that information. And that's the sort of thing that like we need to I think would be good for US gun owners, because they're already told they need to do that, and they already, if you respect guns, you should have no opposition to storing them safely.
100%. You can't go today with what happened 20 years ago, but you can't also criticize all the time and say, well, take away cops altogether, because that's
Nobody said that.
I did not say the cops should be taken away altogether. This is an area that resists reform, resists regulation.
Y'all do not need all the shit that you guys have.
We can give cops body cams, we can't make them switch them on. And any government body that refuses to be regulated, that resists transparency, should not be increasingly armed, should not be increasingly funded. If you want respect, transparency is the way. If you want people to trust you, you have to show them why you're trustworthy. But we need so much more from police.
There's a lot of oversight and accountability that I don't see with the police. And police are people. You know, people have the full range of what they're capable of, and we have seen enough evidence
stuff like that's never like gonna be super strictly enforced. Mostly like the unlawful search and seizure, like that's something that's never gonna be used except in the most extreme circumstances. And and I think like the same thing, like in Japan you have to keep the ammo separate from the firearm storage, because I think the idea is if there was a case where like somebody was able to crack the safe into your like gun safe, like you know, or you know, if like your kid or whatever, if they were able to crack that safe, they would then be left with no ammo to be able to actually do anything with. And also I don't know if this is the case in Japan also, but I know there is somewhere in the world where you also have to go through, I think it's bi-yearly, there's like a time frame where you have to go and submit yourself to like a psychological evaluation. It's not like rigorous, you pretty much just talk with like a psychologist, and they just kind of gauge like, okay, if you give us sussy vibes, then you know, we might like, you know, we might put in the notes like maybe check on this person, maybe go to their house, check on them, maybe, you know, and other stuff like that. And there's also like, I think they have implemented versions of red flag laws where like if family members are able to anonymously or at the very least, you know, like anonymously to like the person owning a weapon, obviously, like, you know, report like, hey, this person's acting off, or maybe I've been abused, or whatever it might be. But there's, you know, like I said, it's always balancing. But yeah, I feel like stuff like that, you can't really like, you know, because even in America, if you tell police when you get pulled over for like speeding, you tell them, hey, I'm a firearm owner, they will be like, okay, we need to see if you're carrying, you need to like, you know, like do all this, like, you know, like, you know, fuck, not field strip it, but at the very least eject the mag, everything else, you know, they'll usually go through the whole process. Run through every single day. The government doesn't even do that with pedophiles. Get some. Yeah, I mean, I can understand that. There's a certain amount of I feel like it'd be the case that that if the government like would you feel better if the government wasn't so like, I'm not sure how it is for you guys up in the Great White North, but at least in the US we are very, very used to government pretty much spying on all of us. Like it's rather like, honestly, it's depressingly normal for me to say something and then get an ad for that thing that I mentioned. So to me, I hear that and I'm like, I kind of get it, but I'm like used to being spied on by my government by this point. So like, but if that was like the only thing, then I wouldn't feel too bad about it. But like, I've been over spied on by my government, so maybe I don't know how it is for you guys. But I can understand if that's like yeah, I can understand if that's like, it's not great. And I mean, you know, when it comes to pedophiles and stuff like that, there's always like, you know, there's always like, how much do we monitor those people after they've gotten out? And that's a whole different conversation. But I kind of get it. I kind of get the trepidation on your part.
Police officers who abuse that power. And I think that the real fact that there is no oversight and ability to ensure that they're doing their jobs well is a real problem with people who are licensed to kill.
But that's false, though. You would make it seem like cops are running rampant. There's a lot more oversight than people know, whether it's federally, city-wise, and there are bad apples, and there's people out there that should not be police officers, and there's nothing more than a good cop that doesn't want a bad cop on the street. The oversight, there's a lot more than people know.
But we have to take everyone's word for it, though, from inside.
I don't know what that means.
I'm saying that you're saying that there's lots of oversight, but again, we just have to believe that, because anytime someone from outside attempts to explore that, it's obstruction 100% of the way.
I wouldn't agree with that.
I really struggle with this concept that we have to fund communities or fund police. No, we have the resources to fund these communities, to fund solutions that we know work, to invest in education, to invest in violence intervention and victims. Like, we're not willing to prioritize life, then we're going to pay the cost on the back end. And one other thing, I think we have to remember that this is not just a crime crisis. You know, 2/3 of lives lost are lost by suicide with guns. This is really a public health crisis, and we keep pivoting back to crime control strategies, and it's failing.
No, you nailed it. We're the richest country in the world, and we can't make sure everyone is secure in their life, doesn't have fears. You want to sell less guns? Make people less fearful. People plan for their fears. Why do people buy guns? Well, they want to feel safer. Well, why do they need to feel safer? Well, because of their community. I was just like, okay, what can we do for their community, right?
I do not believe that police can in any means provide security and safety for us. And a huge part of, wanting to own guns is an aspect of, police failing us. And so to suggest that it's anecdotals, that it's just a couple of bad apples within the system is completely incorrect. We have seen the system fail people and fail to really protect individuals. And so this suggestion that we can fund both, that we can fund both our sense of security and our sense of safety, as well as funding the police departments, is completely false, because a huge aspect of our safety being a detriment is, in fact, the police state's initiatives.
What changes would make a difference in the real world, practically speaking? Kendra, I want to hear your thoughts on this.
I'm a range safety officer, and as long as I've worked on the range, I have seen police come there and train once, right before their qual, or not even, they only come for their qualification. And I have some friends that they train pretty often, but the vast majority, I outshoot them by hundreds of rounds, and I just don't understand that. I do situational training, I do verbal judo so that I know how to de-escalate situations when I encounter them, and I feel like
verbal judo, amazing.
That's what the police force is missing. They need that consistent training with current events that are going on, with different situations, with their firearms, so that they can better protect us. That's what they're there for, and there's no getting rid of them.
I disagree. The firearm is the last tool a police officer uses. I hope Joey agrees. If they're only spending one day at the range, and because they only think they're going to use their gun that little, and they're spending all their time training de-escalation and learning about the community and being a part of it, I'm fine with that.
But I did mention de-escalation.
No, but you mentioned it for yourself, though.
No, for police, they need.
But police officers don't learn de-escalation at the firing range.
They should. Well,
they learn to, shoot accurately, hopefully, and kill, inevitably.
There needs to be a balance, 100%. When you defund the police lack in training. That's a problem. Police need to be trained because everything in life is muscle memory. The number one thing you should do is use your mouth, no matter what you do. You go out there, you talk, and that's where the de-escalation comes in. But by no means a police officer is going out there in their head and say, I want to use my gun today. No, that's the last thing on their mind. Policing has gone away from enforcement nationally, which it should have, and is more community police bases. And that's where the funding goes to, so we can go and change the outlook of what policing has, unfortunately, looked like it's become.
I just think we also have to realize by the time the phone is calling 911, in most shootings, it's too late. It's too late. When I was shot, law enforcement didn't show up till 15 minutes later. My cousin tied my tourniquet, and the bullet hit 2 arteries. I was bleeding to death. I would have died before an officer arrived. And I think if we continue to look at gun violence as something that law enforcement can solve, we're missing it. We take these big assumptions and apply them to reality when it's untrue.
We've been talking a lot about training, and way supportive of that.
Good for you guys.
But I also really think there needs to be accountability.
I feel like we still haven't really. I feel like a lot of our recession era, economics just hardly got fixed. It was everything happened with the recession, and we just kind of got used to it. It's kind of like with COVID now. We just were like, okay, COVID's over, even though there's still traces of it, and there's still issues that it's going to bring up, but we're just gonna move on, deal with, and just ignore it to a degree.
If a cop does something ranging from lightly illegal to murder, there should be accountability for that. And I think the strange thing I see is this sort of closing ranks around these bad apples, even though there's also an acknowledgement that they exist. And I think people will be far less likely to look at police with fear if they understand that if that cop does something they're not supposed to, there's accountability. Joey said he does not want those people walking around. And I suspect that is a pretty common view, and I don't know why those cops are protected then.
Right now, a lot of the conversation around guns is driven by mass shootings, and particularly school shootings. What is the solution to mass shootings in schools?
More protection for our children. Not creating a prison environment. We need to make sure that they understand that the police are their friends and they're there to protect them. Education is what's going to empower everybody, so we need to educate them on all levels, not just firearms, not just school security, but how to take care of themselves and each other.
I was one of those kids who was trained that way and raised that way, not to be super dramatic about it, but things took a turn for me, and I could have been one of the kids on the other side of that gun. I fantasized about it. I was reading things. Of course, you become secretive as a result of this. You hide from the people who know you the most. There's a protectiveness around these issues that is very difficult to penetrate because because it is so bound up in our sense of safety and our sense of family. And it's very difficult to address these because what makes one person safe does not necessarily make someone else feel safe.
I think that
it always does.
Mental health is
inflation
important.
almost always hurts
sometimes
the,
your
hurts
mind
the
went
poor.
to other
They
places,
just have
and that's
less.
what I'm saying, that we need to empower them because without mental
you just
health,
have less
without
money
good mental
to,
health, you can't make any decisions
you know,
about anything else.
Extra,
in a health.
that extra like $1.50 or whatever for milk you're gonna feel when you're making when you're making when you're making $14, $15, or $16 an hour, that extra $1.50 for like milk, you absolutely feel like immediately.
The productive manner.
Much
so we
more
need to
than if
start
you're
empowering
making
our
like
children's minds and taking care of their mental health first.
If you're making
I am living proof of the fact that the problem
30,
does
40
exist
an
and
hour
it
or
does
something
haunt
like
people.
that.
And I was able to come back from a place that other people might not be able to come back from. And I'm not saying it's a danger for everyone, but I'm saying like we can't reach everybody that way. Every community is different. Every community has needs, and the needs need to be addressed. That's why I don't think there's like a hope for like a federal change that will solve school shootings, or maybe even a statewide change, because states are big and house lots of different populations.
I was in elementary school when Columbine happened and when the national sort of injection of those drills into schools happened, and it really messed up my sense of safety. I didn't personally feel more prepared from those drills. I felt afraid in a new place. By the time we're bracing our schools for a mass shooter, it's too late. And so I think that if we really want to address this, you need to look at why these kids are feeling so isolated in the first place. You need to look at what are the conditions of their community that they are existing in.
But we're operating in a reality where we see it and we keep brushing it under the rug. And our children are dying, and I get really frustrated about this focus on just mass shootings and just school shootings because our kids are not safe anywhere. They're not safe in their homes. They're not safe in their neighborhoods. And I think the real solution is not to bring more guns into the situation. I think it's really to invest in people, invest in our kids and their...
Also, the thing is, what's it called? Something, a factor I also really like about Japan's safe storage laws for guns is also if you have somebody in your family that's suffering from suicidal ideation, they don't have the ability to get a firearm to commit suicide. Firearms is the easiest, like the most simple way for you to commit suicide easily. Like use a firearm. It's like a guaranteed way to commit suicide. Whereas a lot of other ways, there are a lot of things that can happen in I don't want to get like super detailed just because it's just a topic that's like dicey. But like when you're planning on harming yourself, a gun is the least complex, easiest way to do so with the maximal amount of damage. Whereas, other ways, there are hiccups that can happen. There are just reactions you might not have to things. Whereas like a bullet to the brain, there's just no like, there's no like 1% chance on that one. It's pretty definitive.
Wellness.
If we're continuously working on ourselves and seeking help for things that we need, I think things will get better in the long run. But some people have, the pride's a little high. And I think that's just something that we need to bring down and, again, normalize seeking help and that being okay.
And the money's a little low. And the access to healthcare is a little low, too.
But it's also improving. I've seen plenty of different options for kids, and there are counselors in school. There's anonymous things online. So as it wasn't a topic conversation before, it definitely is now. And it might be moving slow, but it definitely is moving in that direction.
Not in my neighborhood, though. And I tell you what's happening right now in our neighborhoods. You're traumatized, here's a gun, deal with it.
Now,
that's not the way.
Don't get me wrong.
And that's what I'm really struggling with. But in my neighborhood, people are dying. We're dying. And so we can't just sit here and say, hey, pull yourself up by your bootstraps when people are laying on the concrete.
Oh, no. Is this going to be some Rube Goldberg shit? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I can't tell if you're like joking or not, but yeah, like this dude had to build. Yeah. This is also, I was specifically talking about suicide, but like, think about it. Think about how much work this guy had to do to get to this point. Like, whereas in the US, you just go to a store and like, just pay your $500 and you're good. You pay $536 and you've got probably a Glock with like 30 rounds of ammunition. Actually, probably more like 50. Whereas you gotta go through this whole process. That's all I mean. It's just, you know, the bar for entry. You know, this takes skill. No, it does. I'm not even put the quote there. This takes some skill, ingenuity, and some, you know, this is skill up. You know, whereas Americans, you just go buy a firearm.
One thing that came up earlier was universal background checks. And I'm curious, does everyone here support universal background checks on all gun purchases? And if so, why or why not?
If I want to give anyone on this panel a background check, I can't do it. I have to go to a store with a license, and they can do it. And they usually do it at a cost, right? Why don't we just open up the background check system? Like, why don't we give people the opportunity to have personal responsibility when they transfer firearms from person to person? You know, we have vaccine passports. Why can't we have opt-in, you know, firearm passports?
Universal background checks, in theory, sounds great. Well, I am a domestic violence survivor, right? Say I have to go to this medical professional, this mental health person, and I have to explain to her why I want this firearm. Based off of her own biases about me as a Black woman, Army veteran, survivor of domestic violence, she may say, because of those things, I should not be allowed to own and use a firearm for my own self-defense. So how do we decide who gets to have the firearms based off of their mental health background and who doesn't?
The background check system does save.
I can't speak directly, but you'd be surprised how, like, the snap and do it part is like kind of the jump off the cliff, and it's kind of a spur of the moment thing. And again, whatever process you use, like, you're still going to be victim to the pitfalls of any like process you're going to use. I'm really trying to pick my language well, so I don't get in so, you know, I don't want to get into super specifics, but like, you know, like, however, you know, a lot of people like feel that sort of way and they get to a moment, but like the thing you use to express that in that moment, you are still you know, you are still like kind of abided by. Yeah, you know, there's some good processing again. No, I have not. I've never been in that kind of headspace, luckily. But people are, and like, some people, you know, some people it's like a momentary thing. Some people it's planned out, but most of the time, from what I understand, like, most of it is rather like spur of the moment. There is a lead up to it, but not like, you know, it's not like a thing that you're like, you know, it's not this complex. Like, it's not like one of those like 13 Reasons Why bullshit. That's why people really resented that show. It's because it turned somebody's like suicide into like this planned out game thing, and that's really not how it works very often. You know, it'd be nice if it was that thought out and everything. If there was this weirdly like that shows, there's a lot of problems with that show, but that was also what people had a problem with that show for.
Lives. And I think there are some tragedies that could have been avoided if we had a stronger background check system. Charleston, for example, a young man applied for the background check after the deadline. And
I
said,
agree
okay,
with you.
Well,
It's just
yet. Go ahead and purchase.
It's not like that for everybody, sadly. And
I do think
these sorts of things are due to. You have to remember, these sorts of things are due to you know, the chemical balances in your brain. Also, we're not as in control of our emotions as we always like to believe we are.
Let's say somebody does this universal background check, and then there's an existing gun registry, and they register on it, and they've cleared all of these things, but then they still go out and commit a murder. There's no room with little green lights that says, because this person registered on all accounts, we're keeping track of them, and all of a sudden this green light has gone off, and yes, we know this person's about to commit a murder. So again, speaking of prevention,
we need Minority Report.
But we do that with automobiles, right? If you get how many drunk driving incidents or speeding tickets, at some point your license gets revoked, right? Because they're like, hey, we don't entrust you with this car anymore because you could harm someone else or yourself.
But that is the thing, though, with firearms. When you have a weapons carry license, you commit a crime, they revoke your weapons carry license. But we're talking about if they haven't committed a crime yet, we can't predict. There's no way for us to know what's going to happen in the future.
But right now, our background check system has loopholes where even after you commit a crime, you still can keep your firearm or purchase a firearm.
So illegally, right? Illegally. So no law or policy. There's no way.
Well, it doesn't matter. You're illegally. If you're going to illegally do something, we already have structures in place for that. It's called the police. Like, it's already illegal. You've already gone outside of the bounds of what we can control, like, to a certain degree. Like,
legally purchase a
The
firearm.
boyfriend loophole is a perfect one.
So that's illegal. I do this every day on the 4473. It's the ATF form you fill out to legally purchase a firearm. Are you the actual transferee or buyer of this firearm? So if I am a girlfriend and I'm buying a gun for my boyfriend, that is already a federal crime. It's already illegal.
The boyfriend loophole that I think you're speaking to, the fact that if someone assaults their girlfriend, if that doesn't necessarily go down in the record as the same way as if he assaults his wife. And so if you assault your wife, then that becomes something that forbids you from getting a firearm. But if you assault your girlfriend, even if you're convicted of that, it doesn't necessarily go on the record in a way that prevents you from getting a gun. We're not going to eliminate every person who wants to commit a crime. The goal is to bring the numbers down and to take out the ones we can. You know, we don't live in a society right now where things are crushing it. So I kind of feel like some of these possibilities, you know, there's always going to be drawbacks to things that we try and do. I question whether they are worse than the amount of boyfriends who kill their girlfriends.
100%.
I want to bring it back to the gun question,
100%.
We keep talking about mental health, and there are specific laws.
There's probably still going to be mass shootings in America, even after gun reform. But the whole idea is to bring down the frequency of that.
Red flag laws.
You want to reduce
someone
it. You're never going to eliminate it,
Those laws exist to try to take the gun away from that person before they commit a crime. How do we feel about that?
I'm pretty pro red flag laws. I understand that these laws should be implemented very carefully. There's a lot that goes into the rules portion of passing these bills that should be very well thought out. But I think the overarching question needs to become, do you agree that people who are in certain situations should have guns or not? But I personally think that there are characteristics you can meet, there are situations you can be in where, yeah, I do not want you owning a gun.
Well, I think the question is not so much whether or not people should have guns in certain situations. I think most people would agree, you know, there are certain people who should not have guns. But I think the question is more so, will the United States of America truly take away guns from those that need to have their guns taken away? And I think the answer to that question is no. The United States of America has very easily labeled people criminal that they should not be labeling criminal. And they're more concerned about profiting off of that label than they are actually preventing violence. And so the question is not so much should red flag laws exist. The question is more so, will the United States of America actually enforce the law the way it needs to be enforced? And no, the United States will not.
I'm curious, who are the people who you think shouldn't have guns?
Also, police forces, you say that.
Well, I certainly think
there's local police forces that are like, we're not going to enforce these like red flag laws because because our officers believe in the Second Amendment. They'll literally just not enforce the law because they disagree with it. Which then it's like, okay, cool, you all can get out. We'll hire a new police force.
Of right-wing ideologues should not have guns. I think plenty of violently anti-trans people should not have guns. I think violent misogynists should not have guns. I think violent racists should not have guns. I think those who have the audacity to believe in ideology that is, in fact, an incredible danger to most of us who are in society that do not look like them, should not have access to guns.
With all this legislation, the question is, who do we have drawing it up? The people who never owned a gun or the people that have owned guns? You know, what's the right answer? I don't have that. I think everyone should have a right to carry a gun, but we've touched on it. You know, if you're a violent person, you shouldn't have it. Domestic violence history, shouldn't have it. Drug trafficking, sex trafficking, because a lot of times in the law enforcement world, when you have a lot of drugs, you end up having a couple guns. If you're sex trafficking, there's someone probably with a gun.
How are we going to make sure bias isn't playing a part? The people who are enforcing the red flag laws, there are some elitist people in this country who feel like, well, only we should be protected by firearms. The onus should not be on our government. I think as a society, as an adult in this country, there should be some responsibility in knowing yourself and being able to identify when you are okay, when you're not okay. So I think we need to figure out a way to give the people the tools they need to identify themselves. Hey, I'm not okay. Hey, I don't need to have my firearms right now. Hey, I probably am going to hurt myself or someone else, and then provide the resources to do that.
I mean, that sounds great in theory. In reality, though, that's not going to happen every time. And I'm curious what you think is the threshold where somebody should say, you can't have a gun anymore.
I don't think that decision should hinge on one person or just an attorney or just a judge or just a mental health professional, because I've seen in a lot of these red flag instances, these people never get their firearms back. Well, if my mental health has declined this day or this month is tough for me, but then, I go to therapy or I fix myself and I'm better months from now, I should have my rights restored. You can't keep them forever, right? I think there should be a process for that as well.
I think those protections and checks and balances are just critical because right now America criminalizes black men. There's no doubt about it. I've been through it. I've never been caught for some type of violence offense, but I've had guns drawn on me by law enforcement 5 times, right? When I was shot, when I arrived at the hospital, I wasn't met with a nurse or a doctor or a surgeon. I was met with 3 investigators, and they asked me, where's my gun? And in my situation, they were more focused on solving the crime than saving my life. And I think we have to really see that reality that's impacting our communities every day before we push forward laws and legislation that adds more authority and resources to a system that's biased against us already.
So there's a lot of times that there's a red flag law that's called, and there's uniformed police officers who go to remove a firearm from the situation, who might have biases, who might have racial ideologies in their head. And I think that's a lot of confrontation. I feel like there's a lack of training. The police officers that go to serve these red flag laws, there needs to be a lot of checks and balances, and there needs to be a lot of accountability in how these things are executed.
When we talk about regulation and laws, people need to understand, like, especially on the left, oh, this is going to take the firearms away from the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and the 3%ers and the white militiamen. Really, they're not. Those people don't have any interactions with the police normally, right? You pass these laws, you're going after black men, you're going after brown men, you're going after poor people.
At the end of the day, that there's systemic racism, and then it leads to black and brown people being criminalized. And I'm curious, when it comes to passing more gun laws, how do you...
This is really... I like this group. This group is coming in with, like, actually good points and a lot of nuance.
Think we could avoid
unfortunately, again, I said it at the top of the segment, but like, unfortunately, you have groups like the NRA and honestly the Republican Party who will just say no to any of it because they're funded by the NRA, and the NRA is funded by billionaires. So I mean, unfortunately, they come to the case where there's no political will to do this. But like, this is a good example where the American people are rather I think actually have a lot of good, nuanced, and balanced takes when it comes to gun rights in our fair country.
We have to think about, what is the goal? Are we trying to save lives or solve crimes? And if we're trying to save lives, then we can't just keep putting it on the backs of the criminal legal system. We can't incarcerate our way out of this situation. If that was the case, Louisiana would be the safest city in the country. But it's not. It's one of the most deadliest. So you have the highest level of incarceration and the highest level of gun violence in one state. This is something where we have to think about legislation and laws that provide more resources for the communities that are most vulnerable and at risk to violence.
I'm curious to talk to folks and see, do you support restrictions on specific types of guns, like the AR-15, for example? If so, why or why not?
You know why the AR-15 is popular is because it's affordable. You can customize it to whatever you need to do, whether it's self-defense, hunting, target shooting.
I think what you just said, though, is part of the problem, too, because the AR-15 is really like, it has a marketing appeal. And America does marketing really well. Mm-hmm. And people respond very well to marketing, especially if you're selling them something they already want. So it's very convenient. The pedestal kind of grew up under it. But now that it's there, it's very hard to take that back.
Who are you trying to defend yourself from with an AR-15?
I can
answer a zombie apocalypse?
Anyone.
Someone else with an AR-15.
The logic.
No, the thing is, as a responsible gun owner, a person who owns several rifles, our president's protected with rifles, AR-15 style rifles. Our law enforcement officers.
Yeah, Biden's the president because political assassinations. You go to Kroger,
use, carry, and have AR-15 platform rifles. So if I'm defending myself against, a lot of the 2A people say my government, I have to have equal or greater access to the tools that they have as well. Is the president's life more important than mine? If you don't like
Bro, you in the government is not AR-15 versus AR-15. It's you in an AR-15 versus like an army of drones. Let's be really clear. The people who do like the I need my AR-15 to challenge the government, brother, there's like a drone like a mile above your head. There's a fucking AC-130. Somebody in the military already got their like 11 kills. They got the AC-130 in the air. They gonna drop your ass with like the big 40mm cannon. Stop it. Don't play this. This is stupid. It's a dumb argument.
Great. Don't buy them.
That's not how it works, though. You don't need to get hit with one bullet to die. Just because someone has an AR doesn't mean I got one. We're equal or on the same playing field.
Have you shot them, though?
I don't want to shoot AR-15. I'm not fighting
the reason why I asked, though, is because when you actually shoot rifles, when you have experience handling rifles versus handguns, AR-15 platform rifles versus handguns, you understand that there is a disparity of force there. I'm not bringing a handgun to a rifle fight. I'm not.
Also, an AR-15
if someone in the top
usually
grocery store in
5.56
Buffalo had an AR-15, that would have not saved lives. If anything, it would have harmed more people.
I think if the security guard who defended himself using a handgun against the person who had an AR-15, he had a rifle.
No, they asked the police chief of Buffalo after the shooting, if you were armed with those types of weapons, would you have been a better responder? He said no. He said the only reason that slaughter stopped is because the shooter stopped. Not because they had the right tools.
By security who had a handgun, who took a shot at the chest, and there are armor-piercing rounds, there are types of ammunition for AR-15s that would have ended that threat that moment. But unfortunately, because he had just a handgun, the shooter was forced to slow down, stop, gather himself, but then he continued to take other people's lives.
What you're describing in a way sounds like an arms race, where if someone else has an AR-15, therefore I need an AR-15, and that the end game is that everyone has an AR-15, right?
The AR-15's been around for what, 40, 50, I think it's almost 60 years old now to civilians.
The AR-15? Actually, no, that sounds about right. Because if I remember correctly, the AR-15 platform, if I remember correctly, was deployed first in Nam. So yeah, that does sound about right, actually.
Like Greg has shot hunting rifles. Pretty much every hunting rifle is more powerful than AR-15. The AR-15 is the bare minimum that the U.S. government found out to be lethal to a human being. Just because it has 30 rounds doesn't mean you can shoot 30 rounds at a person.
So why the specific feeling towards AR-15 and not a handgun with a 30-round magazine, which do exist?
I have the same sentiments with that.
So you feel equally about both?
Yeah, I think we are in a world where we're creating these weapons that are literally built for mass fatalities, and we're encouraging that.
We're encouraging responsible gun owners to use the firearm to defend themselves.
For mass fatality purposes.
To defend myself, yes. If a single woman who lives at home and 30 intruders come in, God forbid. Okay, say two. Right, intruders come in. With my handgun, my semi-automatic handgun, using my firearm to defend myself, a rifle would be better. It would have a better advantage. I have a long...
That's not true. Okay, simply from... Okay. Now, granted, she's like an instructor. Like, I'm sure she'd be able to, like, John Wick logic my ass, like, out of the room. But if you are in a home, and I'm already ceding a lot of ground here. If you are in your home, the last thing you want is a fucking rifle for two very simple reasons. One, the actual caliber, like if you're shooting within your home, you have the possibility of like sending bullets out of your home with the caliber, because usually AR-15s are 5.56 ammo, so like it's going to be a bigger round, more powerful round, which means let's say you live in like just a regular suburban neighborhood. As you're firing, there's like shots going out of the house rapidly. There's a solid chance you end up hitting your neighbor across the street, maybe next door to you, on either side, with a rifle. Like, you're not only like, yes, in the sense of like, you might stop the person who's like invaded your home. That might be true. You also might fire off rounds that end up hitting somebody else who's uninvolved with the scenario, and you might kill that person. So in that sense, no, they're not the guns that you want for home defense. Home defense generally, and again, I'm ceding a lot of ground here, but generally, if we're talking home defense, you want pistol caliber handguns usually, mainly because they're not automatic. They're semi-automatic, meaning like you have to pull the trigger for each individual shot, meaning you're going to be more you're not going to be as indiscriminate with how many rounds you're putting out, which means, and also since they're smaller caliber, smaller bullets, you have a lower chance of hitting somebody in the near vicinity that you don't want to hit. And also not only that, rifles in small spaces are not like the best things to have just from a combat sense. Like if you have like a rifle on you, you don't want to be, in a small space. You have less room to maneuver. You probably, go watch a John Wick movie. There's a reason why he mostly uses pistols in small spaces. But anyway, moving on.
Longer maximum effective range as far as defending my life. I don't have to be at a close distance. There are so many other advantages to using a AR-15 platform rifle for self-defense than people realize.
But the culture that y'all are buying into or encouraging is the same culture that armed the shooter at Tops. It's the same sentiment that armed the shooter in Atlanta.
I don't think so.
I mean, it's the same sentiment that, we should have these guns. So what's the difference between that shooter and someone else?
We're good people.
I feel like you're really putting words in our mouth, because we haven't told anyone to go out and buy an AR-15.
I want to jump in because I don't think it's necessarily about telling someone to do it. It's about the availability and the access to that weapon,
which are part of the marketing.
I have a question. If we get rid of AR-15s for law-abiding citizens, how do we defend ourselves when those two guys, and don't say that's not probable, because 2 guys is more probable than 30 guys to kick in your door. How do I defend myself and my children against those 2 guys who have AR-15s? Tell me how. And
there's always these like super extreme scenarios. It's like nobody is kicking in your door to do this. I'm sorry. It's not happening. Like, it's just not. I don't know what to tell you. It's just not. Like,
you said yourself that the police may not make it there in time. Tell me how I
the best chance you got in a situation like that is to get out the house. If you're going to have a shootout with 2 people with AR-15s and your children at home?
She just stated that
so
they
what is
reach
that, 30
far.
rounds a piece? That's 90 rounds of bullets firing through the home?
You think I can outrun that?
You need to get out of the house.
Oh, sir,
You've got a much better chance.
You got a better chance of coming out that window.
No one
than
has
way.
Yeah. No, he's right. He's right.
No one have neighbors.
He's absolutely right. You have a better chance if you're like upstairs with your kids, somebody kicks in the door with like some other person and is like clearing the house with like AR-15s, you have a better chance of survival dropping your kids and yourself out of your window and running like hell than you do like, you know, putting them in the room and then pulling your and engaging. I know it doesn't feel like it's not about outrunning the bullets. It's that running, like they can't, if you have a head start in running, they're not going to be able to keep up with you after that point. All you have to do is break line of sight and you're done. Whereas if you're like, oh, I'll just like John Wick the fucking building. Like, no, you always have the chance of doing any of your gun fu and then you get shot in the back. I'm sorry. It's just like using your actual firearm is the absolute last thing you should be going to.
Like, aren't we concerned about neighbors?
Let's talk about real life, all right? Yeah, the average person is not walking around, and the arrest of firearms are not with AK-47s. Let's get that right. All right, so after this whole panel thing, that's almost like a make-believe world. There's people who own them, but people are getting locked up with them. The average person getting locked up is with a disguised gun, a painted gun. You'll have a magazine clip that's extended, modifications. That's what's happening on a daily basis. People are getting their hands on illegal firearms that are disguised or defaced and using them against one another. That's what's happening in the real world. The average person isn't walking around out of their house with an AK-47.
From what I've heard so far, the two main sort of points I'm hearing is that more guns can make you safer, from one mentality, and another is that mental health is really the solution to prevent shootings. Is there anything else, solutions-wise, that we haven't talked about could make a difference and reduce the amount of gun violence and the number of gun deaths?
I feel like actually the emphasis has not so much been put on mental health as actually community. I feel like that's what I've really been hearing from, you know, even with the recent disagreements, like I've heard everyone here talk about community. We've had so many different ideas in this panel on how we can fix these things, and so many of them involve contributing to community in different directions.
I want to say to to all of the people who have been here advocating for responsible gun use and offering your arguments and your life experience, like I really just want to say it in case no one else says it to you, that I think that you have value in your community without your guns. Like everything that you've talked about and everything that you've presented and the skill and the intelligence and the desire to help people and to train people and to educate people, I honestly think that has nothing to do with your guns.
My staunch view is more education and training. And then also, we know that we are, and thank you for saying that, valuable with or without our firearms. Whether I'm in New York, whether I'm in a country where I can't have a firearm, it's me. I am the tool. I'm the weapon. So it's me and everything I know, and the firearm's just an extension of who I am. So I appreciate you saying that. And I think no one on this panel has said more guns is the solution. I don't think anyone has ever said that this entire time we've been talking.
I want to bounce off of that and say, okay, if more guns, not the solution, is less guns a solution?
No, certainly not. And I think, a huge part of this that we have to, consider is, in fact, the economic.
The problem is there's no version of less guns. Like the US already has a disproportionate amount of gun ownership as it is. I just don't think you're going to be able to get away with that. Like there's just no way. Like the dude who's a cop makes a good point where it's like most people who are walking around who are dangerous and own firearms buy them illegally, or like, they're defaced, that they're all fucked up and janked up. Like, yeah, you're gonna catch those people through the normal legal system. But like the things we want to avoid are people's access to guns when they're in bad places mentally, and specifically school shootings and other kind of like mass killings that are performed by people who have access to guns that they shouldn't have access to. Usually when I say that, I'm thinking more of people who are below the age of gun purchases. There's obviously nothing we can do about somebody who, when they turn 18, they go and buy a Glock and then they shoot up whatever. Like that's never going to be something we can really stop, because it's like you can't stop anybody's first crime because it's their first crime, right? Like, but, the other two you can lower the risk of and lower the percentage, the frequency of.
Considerations. The solution is, in fact, to hold the gun industry accountable for their marketing of violence. And so we can't continue to point fingers at individuals who wish to have such self-determination and self-defense. We need to begin pointing fingers at systems and economic industries that have been so responsible for producing violence and
like
producing
the NRA keeps the conversation.
The gun industry that's making billions of dollars off of firearms and was pouring billions of dollars into the communities that are suffering from gun violence. Like, how would that transform our entire culture? But right now, we are living in a world where this billion-dollar industry is selling that more guns equals more safety narrative, and we're buying into it without pushing back and saying, actually, what we need is more resources for those that have been
Unfortunately, I actually would disagree. I don't think people are buying into it. I think politicians are
a violent world out there,
push towards those outcomes.
We can't simply
most Americans, like I said,
live in a utopia.
I'd say most Americans are somewhere on this panel.
Violence.
And that's true. It is to prevent violence, but it's also about self-determination and self-defense as well. And we have to understand that there are, in fact, mechanisms to stop violence from occurring in the first place. But the only mechanism to end violence that has already occurred, that is already going to occur, is in fact largely the use of firearms for many of us.
I'm hearing a lot of consensus that it's not necessarily the guns, it's the reason that people are using guns. The nuance is like, how do you tackle that, right?
I was gonna say, I think we glossed over the statement that you threw out there. You were like, so it's not necessarily the guns. I think it totally is the guns. There's a unique gun violence problem in America. We have per capita way more guns than every other country. We have a unique problem, and it's not just domestically. And the reason why everyone here who does own or regularly shoot guns, it's their weapon of choice because it is the gun. It is the most powerful weapon. It is capable of the most destruction, and that's why people gravitate towards it.
There's no changes to gun policy in this country that are not incredibly controversial and divisive. Like, how do we find that common ground and make changes that we can think, might make a difference without triggering a second civil war in this country?
The United States Congress needs to remove all legislation that's introduced to absolve the gun industry of any accountability. And the American public needs to begin realizing that our elected officials are, in fact, advocating for such
I don't think that exists.
Of responsibility. And so I think that's very much the first step. And then I think the second step to this is, in fact, to begin producing mechanisms that would stop the gun industry from marketing and profiting in the way that it's been for so long.
The problem, honestly, is if we're talking about systems, the problem is like the campaign finance system. The NRA just pays out way too much money to one side of the political pole and represents a disproportionate voice. The like extreme 2A community is the narrative for the Republican Party's stance on guns, even though they don't make up a majority of that party's opinions. My dad is like a very staunch like gun owner and gun advocate, to the degree that he can be. But like, I don't think any of the things that I would suggest he would really balk at, because he'd be like, yeah, obviously safety and like a few other things. He's like, yeah, I mean, but because the NRA pays politicians to basically run on these extreme 2A stances of like no regulation, I have a right to carry whatever I want, that sort of like dumbed down version of the gun debate. We never get anywhere. It's that an entire party has been captured by this one special interest. And their,
I think if 100,000 people
and
were
their
getting
policy
sick
prescriptions
from some cereal brand every single year, and 40,000 of them were dying, the government would have stepped in immediately, right? And held that brand accountable. And that's what we're dealing with guns and gun violence. We're losing historic numbers of lives.
It's really uncomfortable to wade into this conversation. A lot of people wouldn't choose to unless they were personally affected by gun violence or had their safety at risk. And so I would encourage people to sit with the discomfort, because it's everybody's problem. It's not just America's problem. It's actually a global problem.
I just kind of want to draw people's attention to the fact that there have been a lot of different views on this panel, and yet we are very much pushing for a safer society where fewer people are killed by guns. This is really important for the national conversation, because this is what actually drives progress, as opposed to just everybody fighting on their side.
Thank you all for doing this. We put some really good ideas out there and hopefully change the way people think about this issue. So thank you very much. Thanks for coming and doing this.
Are we allowed to stand up?
Go for it.
All right.
All right. That was delightful. Honest to God, that was a good conversation. Like, again, I had at least some faith that that would be a not like super toxic conversation, and I'm glad that I was rewarded for that faith. The thing that they tell, like at the end of all YouTube videos where they tell you to like click on one of these like things to watch more videos. Yeah, I've been meaning to film one of those. So that's what I was doing. I was just setting it up to film one.